Gunnar Hámundarson was a hero. He lived in the south of Iceland. His farm was called Litterendi. The year was around 990. He was a man of great strength and skill, fair-haired and handsome. But he had killed men, and the families of those men wanted revenge. One day, Gunnar was home with his wife Halgerdur and his mother. His enemies, led by Gizur the White and Geir the Goaty, gathered outside. There were 40 of them. Gunnar was alone. He went to his weapon chest. He took out his bow and arrows, and he took out his atgeir. The sagas call it a bill, or a halberd, or a polearm. We don't really know what it looked like. No archaeologist has ever found one, but we know what it did. The story says that when Gunnar wielded it, the weapon would sing. It made a ringing sound just before it struck. It was a sound his enemies learned to fear. From inside his farmhouse, he fought them off. He shot arrows from the windows. He killed many. One man, Thorgrim, managed to climb onto the roof to try and get inside. Gunnar was waiting. He thrust the atgeir up through the roof and into Thorgrim. The man fell back, slid down the roof, and landed among his friends. As they asked him if Gunnar was home, Thorgrim looked at them. "I don't know," he said, but his atgeir was. Then he died. The fight went on. They came at him again and again. He used his atgeir to great effect. He impaled one man and threw him into a river. He fought with a fury that kept 40 men at bay. But then, during a lull, an enemy cut his bowstring. Gunnar turned to his wife. "Give me 2 locks of your hair," he said, "and you and my mother twist them into a new bowstring for me." Halgerdur looked at him. He had slapped her once, years ago. She had not forgotten. "Does your life depend on it?" she asked. "Yes," Gunnar said. "Then I will not help you," she replied, "because I do not care," and so Gunnar had to fight without his bow. He took up his atgeir again and his sword, but the numbers were too great. They finally overwhelmed him. They killed him there in his own home. He died, but he took many of them with him. His story, written down in Injal's saga a few centuries later, tells us about the man. It also tells us about his weapon, the singing atgeir, a weapon so famous, yet so mysterious. It's a reminder that the Viking arsenal was more than just the simple axe or the double-edged sword we see in movies. There were other tools, other weapons, each with its own story. Number 17, the hook was not for fish. The year is 874. The place is the River Tyne in Northumbria. Einar is not a warrior, he is a shipwright. Or he was, back in Norway. He knows the grain of oak better than he knows the face of his own cousin. He knows how a tree must be split, never sawn, to make a strong hull plank. He can feel the right curve for a keel in his hands. But here on the river, the wind cold and damp, he is just another man on a longship. His hands, usually stained with pine tar, are now gripping the shaft of a grappling hook. The hook is simple, it's heavy iron, a thick central shank with 3 or 4 sharp, curved claws at the end. A heavy iron ring is forged at the top. Through this ring is tied a thick rope, slick with seawater and something that smells like fish oil. Einar has made dozens of these ropes. He has woven them himself, ensuring they are strong enough to hold a struggling whale. This one only needs to hold a merchant cog. Their target is a small fat ship trying to make its way upstream to a fortified settlement. It is low in the water, heavy with grain and wool, and maybe silver. The Norsemen always hoped for silver. Their longship, the Sea Serpent, is faster. It cuts through the gray water like a knife. 24 men row, their oars dipping in perfect time. The rhythm is a low, guttural chant that seems to come from the boat itself. Einar stands in the bow with 3 other men, all holding similar hooks. The merchant ship is clumsy. The sailors on board are panicking. They try to turn, but it's like trying to make a cow dance. The Sea Serpent comes alongside them in a rush of spray and shouted orders. The Northumbrian sailors are armed with short spears and farming tools. They look terrified. Now, roars the chieftain, a man named Hrolf. Einar does not think. He has practiced this. He swings the heavy hook. It's an underhand throw, a full body movement that starts in his feet. The iron hook arcs through the air, the rope uncoiling behind it. It smacks against the wooden bulwark of the other ship with a solid thud. One of the claws catches. It bites deep into the wood. The other men throw their hooks. Two more find a hold, the real work begins. Einar and the others pull. Their boots slip on the wet deck, they heave, their muscles straining, the rope goes taut, the two ships are now bound together. The gap between them is a churning channel of angry water. This is the purpose of the hook. It is not a weapon to kill a man directly. It is a weapon to kill a ship's freedom. It turns two vessels into one chaotic battlefield. Hrolf is the first one over, and he leaps the gap, axe in hand. Other men follow, screaming. The Northumbrians try to fight back. One of them, a big man with a red beard, leans over the side and tries to hack at the rope of Einar's hook with a small axe. Einar does not have a sword. He has his work knife and the hook. He yanks hard on the rope. The hook, still embedded in the wood, shifts. The movement throws the red-bearded man off balance. He stumbles, and in that moment, another Viking is upon him. Einar sees the fight, but his job is the rope. He must keep it tight. If the ships separate, the raid fails. He is the anchor point. He wraps the rope around a cleat on his own ship, his knuckles white. The sounds are a mess of splintering wood shouting in two languages, and the sharp ring of metal on metal. The grappling hook, the skipskroker, was a naval tool. It was a weapon of control. A Viking ship's great advantage was its speed and maneuverability. It could strike and fade away, but in a fight against a larger, slower ship, it needed to negate the other's size. The hook did that. It allowed the Vikings to force a boarding action to turn a sea chase into a land battle on floating platforms. It was a tool for men who understood the sea. They did not just sail on it, they used its very nature to their advantage. Einar, the shipwright, understood this. He knew that the strongest part of a ship was its integrity. The hook broke that integrity. It bound the enemy to you. It meant they could not escape. The battle on the Tyne was over in minutes. The Vikings took the grain, the wool, and a small chest of silver coins. Einar's hands were raw from the rope. He had not swung an axe, but without his hook, the victory would have been impossible. He had held the enemy fast. Number 16, you can't parry a bag of rocks. Astrid was not a shield maiden. She was a farmer's wife. She lived in a small settlement perched on the edge of a fjord in western Norway. The year was about 920. Her days were marked by the sun and the seasons, milking the goats, churning butter, mending clothes, tending the small patch of turnips and barley. Her hands were hard and capable. Her weapon was a cooking knife, good for gutting fish or cutting bread. She had never held a sword. The raiders came in the spring, not from across the sea, but from down the coast. A rival clan, their chieftain killed in a feud the year before, now leaderless and hungry. They were not an army. They were a pack of wolves, desperate and dangerous. Their longship appeared at the mouth of the fjord at dawn, a black shape against the pale light. The men of Astrid's village grabbed their spears and axes. They were farmers and fishermen, not professional warriors. They formed a thin line on the rocky beach below the settlement. Astrid and the other women took the children and the old people. They scrambled up the steep path behind the longhouses. The path led to a high cliff that overlooked the beach. From here, they could see everything. They could see their husbands and sons standing shoulder to shoulder. So they could see the raiders, twice their number, leaping from the ship into the shallow water. There was a feeling of helplessness. They were safe up on the cliff, but they were just spectators to the fate of their homes and their men. Old Thora, a woman whose face was a map of 80 hard winters, started gathering stones. She did not say a word. She just bent her stiff back and picked up rocks. They were smooth, gray stones worn by ancient ice and water. Some were small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Others were bigger, the size of a loaf of bread, needing 2 hands to lift. Astrid understood. She and the other women began to do the same. They piled the stones near the cliff's edge. It was not a plan born of strategy. It was an instinct, a desperate, primal urge to do something. Down below, the fight began. The sound of it carried up to them on the wind, the clash of metal, the splintering of wooden shields, the hoarse shouts of men. The raiders were pushing the village men back. The thin shield wall buckled. Astrid saw her neighbor Olaf go down, a spear in his chest. The raiders were almost at the longhouses. Then Thora gave a cry. It was a thin, reedy sound, but it cut through the air. She heaved a large rock over the edge. It fell, tumbling end over end, and smashed onto the beach below. It did not hit anyone, but it sent a spray of sand and pebbles into the air. Now they all began. Astrid grabbed a rock, one that fit comfortably in her hand. She aimed for the thickest part of the fighting. She threw it. It was a clumsy, weak throw. It fell short. She grabbed another. This time she put her whole body into it. The rock sailed out and down. She saw a raider stumble. She didn't know if her rock had hit him, but it was enough. They became a machine. The younger women and boys ran back and forth, gathering more stones, making piles. The stronger women, like Astrid, stood at the edge and threw. They were not aiming for individuals. They were creating a barrage, a hailstorm of stone, a simple, brutal, and unpredictable attack. A man in a mail shirt cannot block a falling rock with his shield. A sword is useless against a shower of stones from 100 feet above. The raiders, who had been focused on the men in front of them, were now being attacked from the sky. A rock hit one man in the head. He dropped his axe and fell to his knees, stunned. Another large stone crashed into a raider's shield, shattering the planks and breaking his arm. The psychological effect was huge. The raiders were warriors. They understood the rules of a shield wall, of spear and axe. This was different. This was chaos from above. They looked up, confused and angry, and while they were looking up, the village men, given a moment of breathing room, pushed back. They surged forward with new courage. Astrid kept throwing. Her arm ached. Her hands were scraped and bleeding from the rough stones. But she did not stop. She was no longer just a farmer's wife. She was a defender. Her weapon was the very ground beneath her feet. The sling was a known weapon requiring skill, but anyone could pick up a rock. It was the weapon of the desperate. It was the weapon of the common person. And on that day, in that small fjord, the common people used it to save their homes. The raiders, battered from the front and from above, broke. They ran back to their ship, carrying their wounded, leaving their dead on the beach. They rowed away and did not return. Astrid did not watch them go. She was already on her way down the path to see if her husband was still alive. Number 15. The tool for breaking men, not just mail. Ulf was a man built for the shield wall. He was not tall, but he was wide. His center of gravity was low. He could brace his shield, plant his feet, and become a part of a living fortress. He had fought for his Jarl, Sigurd, for 10 summers. He had raided in Ireland and traded in Francia. He was a veteran. The year was 954, and they were fighting other Norsemen in a dispute over land in the Orkney Islands. The battle was a grinding, ugly affair. 2 shield walls, each about 100 men strong, had crashed together on a muddy field. It was not a battle of heroic charges. It was a pushing match, a contest of stamina and nerve. For hours, they stood there, shields locked, pushing, stabbing with spears over the top, and hacking with axes at any exposed leg or arm. Ulf was in the front rank. The pressure was immense. The man next to him was groaning, a spear tip lodged in his thigh. The enemy was fresh. They were bringing up men from the rear ranks to replace the tired and wounded. Ulf's own line was weary. He could feel the push weakening. His spear had broken an hour ago. His axe was good for hooking shields and splitting heads, but in this crush of bodies, there was no room to swing it. The man in front of him was a mirror of himself, a broad, bearded man in a mail shirt and a simple helmet. His shield was new, the paint still bright. He was strong. Every time Ulf pushed, the man pushed back harder. Ulf needed an advantage. He needed something different. He let his axe hang from its wrist strap. With his right hand, he reached for a weapon tucked into his belt. It was not a sword. It was not even a proper dagger. It was a bryntröll. Like, the name literally meant male troll or male piercer. It was a simple, vicious thing. It was a foot-long spike of hardened iron. The handle was just a crossbar, a simple T shape designed to fit in his fist so the blade projected from between his knuckles. There was no edge for slashing, there was only a point, a very sharp, thick, four-sided point designed for one job to punch through chainmail. A mail was excellent protection against a cutting weapon. An axe or a sword blade would often just slide off the interlocking iron rings. But it was vulnerable to a focused thrust. A spear could get through if the aim was true, and a bryntröll was like the tip of a spear without the long, clumsy shaft. It was a close quarters weapon for a very specific problem. Ulf braced his shield with his left arm, putting his full weight into it. He held the bryntröll in his right hand, the point hidden behind his shield. The man opposite him was grunting with effort, trying to push Ulf back. He saw a gap, a small opening under the man's shield arm as he pushed. It was not a heroic swing, it was a short, brutal punch. Ulf drove his fist forward, all his strength concentrated into that single iron point. The bryntröll hit the mail rings under the man's armpit. For a moment, there was resistance, then came a sound like tearing cloth, but it was metal. The hardened point of the bryntröll found a weak link, or maybe it just broke one. Punched through the mail, the man screamed. It was a high surprise sound. His push faltered, he dropped his shield and clawed at his side. He had been untouchable in his expensive mail shirt a moment ago. Now he was dying. The man behind him in the second rank tried to step forward, but the dying man was in his way. And Ulf had created a hole. The shield wall is only as strong as its weakest point. In that moment, the man in the mail shirt was the weakest point. And Ulf and the man next to him surged forward into the gap. The enemy line, which had been a solid wall, now had a wound. It began to unravel. The bryntröll was not a noble weapon. It was not sung about in sagas like a famous sword. It was a tool, a specialized ugly piece of iron for a specific ugly job. It was the weapon you used when you were shield to shield, eyeball to eyeball with an enemy who thought his armor made him safe. It was a weapon that exploited a weakness. It did not rely on grand swings or fancy footwork. It relied on brute force applied to a single point. It was a killer for close, desperate work. Ulf pulled his weapon free. He did not look at the man he had killed. He was already moving forward, looking for the next set of mail rings. Number 14, the peasant's revenge, was a simple stick. Skallagrim Kveldolfsson was an old man. He had settled in Iceland at a place he named Borg. He had been a great Viking in his youth, a friend to kings, and a killer of many men. But now, in the early 10th century, he was a farmer. His son, the famous poet and warrior Egil, was grown. Skallagrim was content to work his land. But the fire of his youth was not entirely gone. One winter, a man named Thord, the son of one of Skallagrim's neighbors, came to work for him. Thord was young and strong but lazy. Skallagrim was a hard worker and expected the same from others. He had a particular way of forging iron, a task he still enjoyed in his old age. He would work the bellows himself, his great strength still evident. As the winter wore on, Skallagrim grew weaker. His eyesight failed. He felt the cold in his bones. He spent more time by the fire. He asked Thord to work the bellows for him at the forge. Thord did it, but he did it poorly. He complained about the work. He was not putting his strength into it. One evening, Skallagrim was trying to forge some iron. The fire was not hot enough. Well, the iron would not soften. Skallagrim knew it was because Thord was being lazy with the bellows. He grew angry. The old Viking temper flared. He was weak and half blind, but he was still Skallagrim. He struggled to his feet, but he could not find his sword or his axe. He was not in his right mind. He was filled with a cold rage. His hand found a staff leaning against the wall of the smithy. It was not a walking stick, it was a goad staff. A long, heavy wooden pole, probably of ash or oak, with a sharp iron point at the end. It was a tool used for herding cattle, of a farmer's tool. You could prod a stubborn ox with it. Skallagrim gripped the heavy staff. Thord saw him coming and laughed. He saw a frail, blind old man waving a stick. Skallagrim did not hesitate. He lunged forward. He was not using it to prod. He swung it like a club. He put all of his remaining immense strength into the blow. The heavy wood of the goad staff caught Thord on the side of the head. There was a sickening crack. Thord fell to the ground, dead. Skallagrim had killed a man with a farm tool. The goad staff, the Havatun Arkafli, was not a weapon of war. It was a part of daily life for anyone who kept livestock. But in the hands of a strong and angry man, anything can be a weapon. This is a truth of the Viking Age that is often forgotten. Not every fight was a pitched battle with professional warriors. Many conflicts were sudden, personal, and fought with whatever was at hand. The goad staff was a perfect example. It had reach like a short spear. It had weight like a club. The iron tip, meant for prodding an animal's hide, could just as easily puncture a man's skin. It was a weapon of opportunity in a sudden brawl at a feast or a dispute over a fence line. A man might not have time to grab his axe, but his goad staff might be leaning right by the door. The story from Eagle's Saga shows this reality. Skallagrim, the old warrior, did not need a named sword from a king's treasure hoard to be deadly. His rage and his strength turned a common object into a lethal weapon. It demonstrates that the line between tool and weapon was thin. A wood-cutting axe could become a battle axe. A fishing spear could become a weapon. And a simple cattle prod could become a man-killer. The Viking arsenal was not just what was in the weapon chest. It was anything they could pick up. Number 13. When the shield stopped being a defense. Hervor was a name of legend. The sagas tell of a shield maiden of that name who sought out a cursed sword from her father's grave. But this story is about another Hervor, a woman whose name is not recorded, fighting in a skirmish on the coast of Gotland around the year 900. She was not a mythical figure, she was a raider. She stood in the second rank of a shield wall, her spear held ready. The people defending the shore were stubborn. They had formed their own wall, and the two lines had been locked in a stalemate for what felt like an eternity. The press of bodies was suffocating, the noise was a constant roar. Hervor could barely hear the commands of her chieftain. The man in front of her, a burly raider named Styrbjorn, was struggling. His opponent was skilled, using his spear to probe for any weakness. Suddenly, the defender's spear darted out under Styrbjorn's shield and caught him in the leg. Styrbjorn howled and staggered back, breaking the line. The defender saw his chance. He stepped forward into the gap, raising his axe to finish Styrbjorn. There was no time for Hervor to use her spear. The man was too close. The space was too tight. She did what she had been trained to do. She stepped into the breach, bringing her shield forward. The Viking shield was not a passive piece of equipment. It was a weapon in its own right. It was a round disc of wood, usually pine or linden, faced with leather or linen. In the center was the key component, the shield boss. This was a dome of thick iron held in place with rivets. The handle of the shield was a wooden bar directly behind this metal dome. When you held the shield, your fist was protected inside the iron boss. Hervor did not block the incoming axe with the flat of her shield. That was for amateurs. A heavy axe could split a wooden shield. Instead, she moved forward and punched. She drove the center of her shield, the iron boss, directly into her opponent's face. The force of the blow was tremendous. It was not just her arm strength. It was the momentum of her entire body, concentrated on that small, hard dome of iron. The sound was a dull, wet crunch. The man's nose broke, his teeth shattered, he dropped his axe, his hands flying to his ruined face, and stumbled backward, blinded by pain and blood. The gap was sealed. The immediate threat was gone. Styrbjorn, clutching his bleeding leg, was pulled back into the ranks, and another man stepped up. Hervor had not used a sword, she had not used an axe or a spear, she had used her shield. The shield bash, or skaldborg, was a fundamental part of Viking combat. It was used to create openings, to stun opponents, to break their rhythm. Punching with the boss could break bones, shatter teeth, or knock a man unconscious. The edge of the shield, often rimmed with hardened leather or sometimes iron, could also be used offensively. A fighter could slam the edge into an opponent's shins or forearms, causing pain and forcing them to lower their own shield. In the chaos of a shield wall where there was no room for wide swings, these close-range, brutal tactics were essential. The shield was your primary defense, but it was also your closest weapon. It was an extension of your fist. A skilled warrior could use their shield to control the space in front of them, to bind their opponent's shield or weapon, and to deliver powerful, disabling blows. Herver held her place in the line, her spear now ready. The man she had struck was being trampled underfoot. She did not feel any triumph. It was just a necessary action in a long and brutal fight. Her shield was scarred and dented, but it had done its job. It had protected her, and it had attacked for her. It was a constant companion in the chaos, both a guardian and a weapon. Number 12. The Blacksmith's Fury. The raid on the Frankish monastery had gone wrong. It was the year 845. The target was supposed to be wealthy and poorly defended. It was wealthy, but it was not poorly defended. A local lord had been visiting with his retinue of household warriors. The Vikings, led by a chieftain named Orm, had expected to fight monks with clubs. Instead, they were fighting armored men with good swords. Sven was not a warrior. He was the ship's carpenter and blacksmith. He was on the raid because every able-bodied man was needed. His job was to repair the ship, sharpen the axes, and fix broken shields. He had a long, handled axe, but he was clumsy with it. He preferred the feel of a hammer in his hand. The fighting had spilled into the monastery's workshops. Sven found himself cornered in the smithy. The air smelled of cold coal and iron. Two Frankish soldiers, both wearing leather armor and iron helmets, blocked the doorway. Sven's axe had been knocked from his hands. He was trapped. He backed away, his eyes darting around the small, dark room. His foot hit something on the dirt floor. He looked down. It was a hammer. Not a blacksmith's forging hammer, but something heavier, cruder. It had a long wooden handle and a thick, square head of solid iron. It was a sledgehammer, used for heavy ironwork. Sven grabbed it. The handle was smooth and worn from use. It felt familiar. It felt right. The two soldiers advanced into the room, swords held ready. They smiled. They saw an unarmed man, a craftsman, not a fighter. Sven held the hammer in a two-handed grip. He did not adopt a warrior's stance. He stood like he was about to strike a hot piece of iron on an anvil. One of the soldiers lunged at him. Sven did not try to parry the sword. He simply swung the hammer. The weight of the hammerhead did the work. It was not a fast weapon, but it had immense momentum. The soldier tried to block the swing with his sword. The iron hammerhead met the steel blade. The sword did not break, but the shock of the impact traveled up the soldier's arm. He cried out and dropped his weapon, his fingers numb. Before the soldier could recover, Sven swung again. This time he aimed for the man's helmeted head. The hammer connected with a deep, resonant clang, like a broken bell. The helmet dented. The man inside it collapsed, without a sound. The second soldier stared in shock. He had just seen his companion killed by a common tool. He hesitated for a second. That was all the time Sven needed. He took a step forward and swung the hammer in a low arc, aiming for the man's legs. The soldier tried to leap back, but he was not fast enough. The hammerhead crushed his knee. The bone shattered with an audible snap. And the soldier fell, screaming. Sven stood over him, breathing heavily. He was spattered with blood. In his hands, the heavy hammer felt like an extension of his own anger and fear. He had killed one man and crippled another. The warhammer was not a common Viking weapon. They preferred blades and points. Axes and spears were far more prevalent in archaeological finds, but hammers were certainly used. Finds like the Mastermere chest from Gotland, a Viking-age tool chest, contained blacksmithing hammers that could easily serve as weapons. The sagas also mention them, though rarely. A hammer has a singular, brutal purpose. It does not cut. it crushes. Against an armored opponent, this could be more effective than a sword. A sword might glance off a helmet. A hammer blow, even if it didn't break through the metal, would transfer a massive amount of kinetic energy to the person inside. It caused concussion, broken bones, and internal injuries. A mail shirt that could stop a cut was little defense against the blunt force trauma of a heavy hammer. Sven was not thinking about the physics of his weapon. He was thinking about survival. He had used the tool he knew best, the tool that felt comfortable in his hands. He stepped out of the smithy, the hammer resting on his shoulder. He was no longer just a blacksmith. He was a man who had discovered the simple, terrifying effectiveness of focused brute force. Number 11, the throwing spear of the English fens. The year is 991. The place is the coast of Essex, near the town of Malden. A young man named Wulfstan stands on the bank of the River Blackwater. He is not a Viking. He is an Anglo-Saxon, part of the local militia, the Fyrd, called up to defend their homes. Across a narrow causeway on a small island is an army of Norse raiders. Their leader, a man history would remember as Olaf Tryggvason, wants tribute. The English ealdorman Bertnoth has refused. Now, there will be a battle. Wulfstan is nervous. He is a farmer. His shield is a simple wooden circle. His main weapon is a spear, but tucked into his belt is another weapon, smaller and lighter. It is a javelin, a simple throwing spear. It is about 4 feet long, much shorter and thinner than his heavy fighting spear. The head is small and leaf-shaped. The shaft is of ash, balanced for flight. The tide is high. The causeway connecting the island to the mainland is flooded. The two armies can only shout insults at each other across the water. Wulfstan and his companions stand in a shield wall, waiting. They watch the Vikings, a confident, menacing line of armored men. As the tide begins to fall, the causeway starts to emerge from the water. The battle is about to begin. Bertnoth gives an order. Spears forward. The front rank of the English line bristles with the points of their heavy fighting spears. But another order comes. Archers and throwers, make ready. Wulfstan draws his javelin. He is not an archer. He does not have the skill for a bow, but he has thrown spears since he was a boy hunting small game in the woods. He knows the feel of the weapon. He knows how to put his shoulder and back into the throw. The first few Vikings begin to test the causeway. They step cautiously onto the slick seaweed-covered stones. They are the targets. The English archers let fly a volley of arrows. Then it is Wulfstan's turn. He and a dozen other men with javelins step forward a pace. They raise their weapons. Throw! Wulfstan takes a short run-up. He plants his foot and throws. The javelin leaves his hand with a smooth release. He watches it arc across the gray sky. It is a moment of strange calm in the midst of the tension. He sees his javelin fall among the advancing Vikings. He does not see if it hits anyone. There are too many others in the air. A shower of light spears rains down on the Norsemen. One Viking caught on the narrow causeway with nowhere to dodge, cries out and falls, a javelin sprouting from his shoulder. Another is hit in the leg. The purpose of the javelin was not always to kill, it was to disrupt, to wound, to break the enemy's formation and morale before the main lines clashed. A javelin could pierce a shield, and its light shaft would make the shield awkward and heavy to use. A wounded man, even one not fatally injured, was a liability. He had to be helped, or he would slow down the advance. The javelin was a tool for sowing chaos. The Vikings are a proud people. Their leader, watching from the island, is angered by this defiance. He shouts a challenge to Bertnoth. The old poem, The Battle of Malden, records what happened next. Bertnoth, in a moment of excessive pride, agrees to let the entire Viking army cross the causeway unmolested so they can fight a fair battle on the mainland. It was a fatal mistake. Once the Vikings are across, the real battle begins. Shield wall crashes against shield wall. Wulfstan is now using his heavy spear, fighting for his life in the press of bodies. His javelins are gone, spent in the opening moments of the fight. But They served their purpose. They had been the first blood. The javelin or gafflak was a common weapon across northern Europe. It was cheaper and easier to make than a sword. It required less training than a bow. Almost any man could be taught to throw one with reasonable accuracy. In large battles, a volley of hundreds of javelins could be devastating, especially against unarmored or lightly armored troops. It was the opening move, the prelude to the brutal close quarters fighting that would decide the day. Wulfstan would die that day, along with his lord Byrhtnoth, but he died a warrior, having used all the weapons at his disposal, from the light throwing spear to the heavy war spear. Number 10, the weapon that sang in the night. The longhouse was dark. The only light came from the dying embers of the central hearth. Gunnar Hámundarson lay on a bench, pretending to be asleep. He was in a remote part of Iceland at a farm called Sandhauger. The farm was haunted. Every Christmas, a creature came and terrorized the inhabitants. The farmer Thorhall had offered a great reward to anyone who could deal with the menace. Grettir, an outlaw and a man of incredible strength, had taken the job. Though he listened, the wind howled outside. Then he heard another sound, a heavy scraping sound from the roof. The creature was here. Grettir wrapped himself tighter in his cloak, his hand gripping the hilt of his short sword. But he knew a sword might not be enough. He had another weapon ready, hidden beside him on the bench. It was a sling. It was a simple thing, just a length of braided wool with a small leather pouch in the middle. In the pouch was a smooth, heavy river stone the size of a goose egg. The sling was a shepherd's tool, a hunter's weapon. It was not considered a noble weapon for a warrior of Grettir's stature, but Grettir was a practical man. A huge clawed hand reached down through the smoke hole in the roof. It was a troll wife, a monstrous being from the wilderness. She was looking for food. Grettir remained still. The creature could not see him in the dark. She reached further, her arm stretching down towards the hearth. Grettir moved. He did not draw his sword. He picked up his sling. In one fluid motion, he stood up, whirled the sling around his head 3 times, and released one end of the cord. The stone flew through the dark room with a vicious hum. The stone struck the creature's outstretched arm. There was a loud crack, the sound of bone breaking. The troll wife howled in pain and rage. She snatched her arm back, pulling it out of the smoke hole. Grettir was already at the door, his sword now in his hand. He pursued the creature out into the winter night. The sling had not killed her, but it had wounded her. It had leveled the playing field. It had turned a supernatural monster into a bleeding, injured animal. The sling is one of humanity's oldest weapons. It is ancient, simple, and deadly. In the Viking Age, it was still a part of the arsenal, though it was often overlooked in favor of the more prestigious weapons of the warrior class. The sagas like Grettir's Saga mention it. It was used in hunting for bringing down birds and small game. It was also used in warfare, especially in naval battles and sieges. A skilled slinger could be incredibly accurate and powerful. The velocity of a stone from a sling could be immense, far greater than a stone thrown by hand. It could kill a man, break bones, and dent helmets. It was a weapon of the common man. It cost nothing to make. The ammunition was free, lying on the ground everywhere. While the archer might be seen as a specialist, the slinger was often just a farmer or a shepherd who had used the tool his entire life. On a battlefield, a group of slingers could harass an enemy line from a distance, disrupting their formation and causing casualties before the warriors with axes and swords ever made contact. From the deck of a ship, a slinger could rain down stones on an enemy vessel, clearing their decks and making it difficult for them to row or fight back. Grettir eventually caught up to the troll wife and killed her with his sword in a terrible fight beside a waterfall. But the first blow, the one that crippled the monster and gave him the advantage, was struck with a humble sling. It was a reminder that in a world of sharp iron, a simple stone thrown with skill and force could still be a formidable weapon. It was the great equalizer, a tool that allowed a man to project his strength far beyond the reach of his own arm. Number 9, the Frankish axe that tumbled through the air. Ragnar was a young Viking on his first major raid. The year was 885. He was part of the Great Army sailing up the Seine River to attack Paris. He had a round shield his father had given him and a heavy-bladed axe he had bought himself. He thought he was well armed. He was about to learn a lesson. The Vikings had to pass a series of fortified bridges to reach the city. The Franks were waiting for them. The fighting was fierce, a confused mess of small boats and fortified riverbanks. Ragnar was in a boat trying to get close to a wooden tower built on the river's edge. Frankish soldiers lined the top of the tower, shooting arrows and throwing spears down at them. Ragnar held his shield up, the arrows thudding into the wood. He was focused on getting to the tower. Then he saw something strange. A Frankish soldier on the tower was not holding a spear or a bow. He was holding a small axe. It had a short handle and a uniquely shaped head. The top edge curved up, while the bottom edge curved down, creating a distinctive SE shape. The man was not preparing to chop. He was preparing to throw. Ragnar had seen axes thrown before, but it was usually a desperate last-ditch act. This looked different. The Frankish soldier swung the axe over his head and threw it. It did not fly straight. It tumbled end over end, a spinning, glittering blur of sharpened steel. It was not aimed at Ragnar. It was aimed at the boat. The axe spun through the air and hit the water just in front of them. But another one was already in the air. And another. The air seemed to be full of these spinning blades. One hit the side of their boat with a loud chunk, the blade biting deep into the oak planks. Another Viking, a man named Kjetil, was not so lucky. He raised his shield, but the tumbling axe came in at a strange angle. The lower point of the axe head dipped under his shield and hit him in the thigh. The blade was so sharp it cut through his wool trousers and deep into the muscle. He screamed and fell to the bottom of the boat. This was the Francisca. It was the national weapon of the Franks. They had used it for centuries. It was not just a chopping tool, it was a perfectly balanced throwing weapon. Its unique shape and weight distribution made it tumble in the air, making it incredibly difficult to block with a shield. The flight path was unpredictable. The sharp point on the top or bottom of the blade was just as likely to hit as the main edge. The purpose of the Francisca was not necessarily to kill, although it certainly could. Like the javelin, its primary role was to shatter an enemy's defense before the charge. A volley of dozens of these spinning axes thrown just before the clash of shield walls would be terrifying. They would break shields, wound men, and cause chaos and fear in the enemy ranks. A man with a heavy Francisca blade stuck in his shield would have to discard the shield, leaving him vulnerable. Ragnar watched a new kind of fear and respect growing in him. The Vikings were masters of the axe in close combat. Their long-handled Dane axes were feared throughout Europe. But this was different. This was using the axe as a projectile, with skill and precision. It was a tactical weapon. The Vikings were adaptable. They learned from their enemies. It is likely that some of the throwing axes used by Vikings were inspired by or were captured Franciscas. They saw how effective it was and incorporated the idea into their own arsenal. The idea of a specialized throwing axe, distinct from a fighting axe, was a powerful one. Ragnar's boat never made it to the tower. They were forced to pull back, carrying the wounded Kjetil with them. That night, by the campfire, Ragnar could not get the image of the tumbling axe out of his head. He had come to Francia to fight. He had ended up receiving a painful education in the weapons of his enemies. He now understood that the axe was not just one weapon. It was many, and some of them could kill you from 30 paces away. Number 8. The bows they found in the mud. The farmer was digging a ditch to drain a bog. The place was Skane, in what is now southern Sweden. The year was 1940. His shovel hit something hard. It was not a rock, it was wood. He dug carefully around it. He pulled out a long, dark piece of wood. It was a bow. It had been preserved for centuries in the oxygen-free mud of the bog. He found another, and then another. These were the Skane longbows, and they changed our understanding of Viking archery. For a long time, people thought the Vikings were not great archers. The sagas talk about bows, but they often seem secondary to the axe and sword. But the bows from the bogs and from Viking settlements like Hedeby in Denmark tell a different story. These were not simple, weak bows. They were powerful longbows made with incredible skill. Let us imagine a man named Bjorn living near Hedeby around the year 970. Bjorn is not a farmer. He is a hunter and a bowyer. His life is spent in the woods, and his craft is making bows. He does not use just any wood. He seeks out the perfect yew tree. He knows that the power of a good bow comes from using both the heartwood and the sapwood of the yew. The heartwood, the inner part of the tree, is resistant to compression. The sapwood, the outer layer, is elastic and resists tension. A yew longbow is a natural laminate, a perfect piece of engineering grown by nature. Bjorn spends weeks crafting a single bow. He splits the log, carefully following the grain. He shaves the wood down with a drop knife, leaving a thick layer of pale sapwood on the back of the bow, the side facing away from the archer, and a belly of reddish heartwood on the inside. The bow is as tall as he is, maybe 6 feet long. It is not an elegant curve. It is a D shape in cross-section, thick in the middle, and tapering to the tips where he carves notches for the bowstring. The bowstring is made of linen or sinew, waxed against the damp. When strung, the bow has a draw weight of over 100 pounds. This is not a toy. It takes immense strength and practice to draw it to the ear and hold it steady. Bjorn's arrows are ash or pine, fletched with goose feathers. The heads are iron, some are broadheads for hunting or for cutting ropes on ships. Others are long, thin bodkin points designed to punch through leather armor or chainmail. Bjorn is not just a hunter, he is also a warrior. When the town of Hedeby is threatened, he does not stand in the shield wall. He stands behind it. Or he mans the wooden ramparts of the town's defenses. From this position, he and the other archers are the artillery. In a naval battle, Bjorn is on the deck of a longship while the other men row. He stands ready with his bow. His job is to sweep the decks of the enemy ship before they get close enough to board. He aims for the enemy steersman, the chieftain, the other archers. An arrow can kill from 100 yards away. It can wound and disrupt from even further. It is a weapon of distance and precision. The discovery of bows like the Hedeby bow and the skein longbows proves that the Vikings had access to archery technology just as advanced as the famous English longbows of later centuries. The skill was there, the materials were there, the bows were powerful military weapons. We often picture the Viking warrior as a berserker with an axe rushing into the fray. But the reality was more complex. A Viking force was a combined arms army. It had the heavy infantry of the shield wall, and it had the ranged support of the archers. A man like Bjorn, the bowyer from Hedeby, was as crucial to victory as the fiercest warrior in the front line. His weapon could kill silently from a distance, long before the axes began to fall. He was a specialist, a craftsman, and a killer. His tools were wood, sinew, and iron, and the bog preserved them, waiting to tell their story. Number 7. The weapon a free man carried every day. The man's name was found carved in runes on his knife. Kilfing. He was a trader, or perhaps a warrior, buried around the 8th century on the island of Gotland. With him in his grave was his most personal possession. It was not a sword, it was a seax. The seax was the utility knife of the Viking Age. The name itself is the root of the word Saxon, a people named after the knife they carried. It was a single-edged blade, ranging in size from a small paring knife to a weapon that was almost a short sword. But they all shared a basic design, a long straight edge, and a thick, heavy spine that dropped down to the point at a sharp angle. Let us imagine Kilfinger in his life. He is on a trading voyage to the east. His ship is loaded with furs and amber. He uses his seax every day. It is a tool. He cuts his food with it. He mends a leather strap with it. He carves a piece of wood to pass the time. The The thick spine of the knife is strong enough that he can use a piece of wood to hammer it through a larger branch, a technique called batoning. His seeks is always at his belt, in a leather sheath. It is as much a part of him as his boots. But his voyage is dangerous. Pirates are common on the Baltic Sea. One day, 2 ships appear on the horizon. They are raiders. Kilfinger's ship is a trading gnar, slow and heavy. They cannot outrun them. The crew prepares to fight. Kilfinger does not own a sword. A sword was an expensive, high-status weapon. It was the mark of a wealthy warrior or a chieftain. Kilfinger is a common man. His weapon is the same as his tool, his seeks. The raiders board their ship. The fighting is a desperate, chaotic brawl on the crowded deck. A man with a spear lunges at Kilfinger. He blocks the spear shaft with his forearm and steps inside the spear's reach. Now, the spear is too long to be useful. The man is too close. Kilfinger draws his seeks. It is not a dueling weapon like a sword. It is a stabbing and slashing weapon for close, ugly work. He holds it in a forward grip like a modern kitchen knife. He thrusts the point into the raider's unarmored side. The man grunts and falls back. Another raider, this one with an axe, swings at him. Kilfinger ducks under the swing. The seeks is short and fast. He brings it up, slashing at the man's arm. The single, razor-sharp edge cuts deep. The man drops his axe. The seeks was the perfect weapon for this kind of fighting. In the press of a shield wall or on the deck of a ship, there was often no room to swing a large axe or sword. A short, stout knife was ideal. It could be used to stab over or under a shield. It was a weapon of last resort when your spear was broken and the enemy was on top of you. There were many types of seeks. Small ones were just knives. Larger ones, called langseeks or long knives, had blades over a foot long. These were true weapons, a kind of single-edged short sword. Many of them were beautifully made, with blades of pattern welded steel, a technique where rods of iron and steel were twisted and forged together to create a strong, flexible blade with a watery pattern on the surface. Kilfingre survived the fight. He and his crewmates drove the pirates from their ship. His seeks was bloody, but it had saved his life. It was a humble weapon. It was a tool for eating and working, but it was also a blade of hard, sharp steel. It was the weapon every freeman carried, a symbol of his ability to work, to provide, and when necessary, to kill. It was the true knife of the Viking Age. Number 6, the poor man's weapon, was the most common of all. And Thorkel was a farmer. He was not a Viking. He did not own a ship or go on raids. He lived in the Danelaw in England in the late 10th century. He had a small farm, a wife, and 3 children. He was a subject of the local Danish jarl, but his life was one of mud, crops, and seasons. One day, the jarl sent out a call to arms. A Saxon king from the south was marching north with an army. The jarl needed every man who could hold a weapon. Thorkel was not a rich man. He could not afford a sword. He could not afford a mailshirt. He owned a wood-cutting axe, but the jarl's men told him he needed a spear. So Thorkel made one. He went into the woods and cut a long, straight shaft of ash wood. He spent days scraping it smooth, making it strong and flexible. It was about 8 feet long, taller than he was. For the head, he went to the village blacksmith. He traded a sack of barley for a simple iron spearhead. It was a basic leaf-shaped design with a socket that fit over the end of the wooden shaft. He fixed it in place with a single iron rivet. Now he was a soldier. He marched with hundreds of other farmers, all armed like him. They were the core of the army. Not the glamorous axe-wielding berserkers, but the men of the shield wall. The spearmen. When they met the Saxon army, they formed up in a line shoulder to shoulder. Thorkel stood in the 3rd rank. He held his shield in his left hand and his spear in his right. The men in the front rank made a solid wall of their shields. Their spears projected out from between the shields, a hedge of sharp iron points. Thorkel's job was to place the tip of his long spear on the shoulder of the man in front of him, adding his strength and his weapon to the bristling wall of death. The Saxon army charged. The clash was a physical shock that ran through the whole formation. Thorkel leaned into the man in front of him, pushing with all his might. The noise was deafening. He could not see the enemy clearly, only a mass of shields and helmets pressing against his own line. He used his spear. It was not a weapon for fancy moves. In the formation, he could only thrust. He jabbed forward over the heads of his comrades in the front rank, aiming for the faces and necks of the enemy. It was like trying to spear fish in a crowded barrel. He thrust and pulled back, thrust and pulled back. A man in the front rank in front of him went down, a sword wound in his neck. Thorkel was shoved forward to take his place. Now he was in the front line. The horror of the battle was right in his face. A Saxon with a great beard was hacking at his shield with an axe. And Thorkel did not try to fight the axe. He thrust his spear under the man's shield and into his stomach. The man dropped his axe and staggered away. Another man took his place. The spear was the king of the battlefield in the Viking Age. It was cheap, it was easy to make, it was easy to learn how to use, at least at a basic level, and in the hands of a disciplined formation, it was incredibly effective. A wall of spears was almost impossible to break with a frontal assault. Horses would not charge it. Men on foot would be impaled before they could get close enough to use their swords. The archaeologists find far more spearheads than any other type of weapon. For every sword found, dozens of spearheads are unearthed. This tells us what the reality of Viking Age warfare was. It was not primarily about individual heroes with swords. It was about formations of common men, armed with shields and the humble spear. Thorkel survived the battle. His shield was splintered, his arm was numb, and he had a cut on his cheek. But he was alive. He had held the line. His simple, homemade spear had been enough. It was not a famous weapon, it had no name, but and thousands like it were the weapons that truly won and lost the wars of the Viking Age. Number 5, the weapon that was just a heavy piece of wood. As Leif was a thrall, he was a slave. He had been captured in a raid on a village in Ireland when he was a boy. Now he worked on a farm in Norway, owned by a man named Harold. The year was around 930. Leif's life was hard work and little reward. He slept in a shed. He ate the scraps from his master's table. He owned nothing. He was not allowed to carry a weapon. A thrall with a weapon was a dangerous thing. One night, Leif was awakened by screams. He looked out of his shed. The main longhouse was on fire. Raiders. A longship was pulled up on the beach, and dark figures were moving through the farmstead, carrying torches and axes. Harald and his sons were trying to fight them off, but they were outnumbered. Leif was terrified. He could run and hide in the woods. No one would blame him. He was just a thrall. It was not his fight. But he had lived on this farm for 10 years. Harald's wife had sometimes been kind to him, sneaking him extra food. He watched as one of the raiders struck Harald down. Something inside Leif snapped. It was not loyalty, it was rage. Rage at the raiders, rage at his master, rage at his own powerless life. He looked around for a weapon. There were no swords or spears in his shed. There were only tools and a pile of firewood. He grabbed a piece of firewood. It was a log of birch, about 3 feet long, thick and heavy. It was seasoned and hard as a rock. As he gripped it in both hands, it was not balanced like an axe. It was just a heavy club, a cudgel. He ran from the shed, screaming a wordless cry of fury. A raider turned to face him, a sword in his hand. The raider laughed when he saw Leif and his weapon. He saw a slave with a piece of wood. He swung his sword in a lazy arc. Leif did not try to block the sword. He knew the wood would splinter. Instead, he charged in, swinging his club low. The heavy birch log connected with the raider's knee. The sound was a dull, sickening crack. The raider dropped his sword and fell, clutching his shattered leg. Leif did not stop. He was filled with a strength he did not know he possessed. He was no longer a thrall. He was a force of pure violence. He saw another raider about to strike down one of Harold's young sons. Leif ran at him from the side. He swung the club with all his might at the man's head. The raider was wearing a leather helmet, but it was no match for the brutal, crushing force of the heavy log. The man crumpled to the ground. The club is the oldest weapon of all. It is humanity's first tool of violence. In the Viking Age, it was still very much in use. While free men carried iron weapons, the club was the weapon of the desperate, the poor, and the enraged. It required no skill to make and little skill to use. It was all about brute force. It might not have been a primary weapon on a battlefield, but in a brawl, a surprise attack, or an uprising, the club was a fearsome thing. A heavy piece of wood can break bones, crush skulls, and disable an opponent just as effectively as a sharp piece of iron. The sagas occasionally mention characters using clubs or tree branches in a rage. It was the weapon you grabbed when you had nothing else. Leif did not survive the night. The raiders were too many. But he did not die as a slave, cowering in a shed. He died on his feet, fighting. He died with a weapon in his hands. It was only a piece of firewood, but for a few moments it had made him the equal of men with swords. It was a weapon that gave power to the powerless. Number 4, the weapon that came from the sea. Ketil lived on the Lofoten Islands off the northern coast of Norway. The year was 890. His world was one of gray seas, tall mountains, and long winter nights. He was not a raider. He was a whaler. From his small boat, a carve, he and his crew hunted the great beasts of the ocean. Their primary tool was the harpoon. The whaling harpoon was a formidable piece of equipment. It had a long, sturdy wooden shaft. The head was of iron, with a single, large barb designed to lock into the flesh of a whale and not pull out. A long, strong rope made of walrus hide was attached to the head. One summer, a ship of raiders, strangers from the south, came to Ketil's village. They were not there to trade. They wanted food, supplies, and slaves. The men of the village were mostly fishermen and hunters. They had axes and spears, but they were not an army. The raiders were professionals, clad in mail and armed with swords. The raiders demanded that the village give them their boats. For Ketil, this was a death sentence. Without his boat, he could not hunt. Without the hunt, his family would starve in the winter. He refused. The raiders attacked. They tried to seize the boats on the beach. Ketil and his crew were there working on their nets. They were caught by surprise. Ketil's axe was in his house. But his harpoon was right there, leaning against the side of his boat. He grabbed it. It was a long and heavy weapon. It was not designed for fighting men, but Ketil knew how to use it. He was used to throwing it with great force and accuracy from the pitching deck of his small boat. A raider with a sword and shield ran towards him. The man expected Ketil to run. He did not expect Ketil to fight back with a fishing tool. Ketil did not hesitate. He held the harpoon like a spear and lunged. The raider raised his shield. The heavy iron head of the harpoon punched right through the thin wood of the shield. The barb caught on the other side. The raider was now in a terrible position. His shield was useless, fouled by the harpoon. He could not get it free. He was off balance. Ketil yanked the harpoon back. The raider was pulled forward, stumbling. Ketil's friend, another whaler, was there with a fishing gaff, and he brought the sharp hook down on the raider's head. Another raider tried to get around Ketil. Ketil swung the long shaft of the harpoon like a quarterstaff, knocking the man's legs out from under him. The weapon had reach. It had a sharp point. It had a heavy shaft. It was surprisingly effective. The line between a tool and a weapon was often non-existent for the people of the Viking Age. They were practical. They used what worked. For a coastal people, a maritime people, their working tools were often formidable weapons. A boathook, a fishing gaff, an anchor, all could be used in a desperate fight. The harpoon was perhaps the most deadly of these improvised weapons. The whalers of Lofoten drove the raiders off. They were not warriors, but they were hard men, used to a dangerous life. They fought with the tools of their trade. They defended their homes with the same weapons they used to feed their families. Ketil stood on the beach, his harpoon in his hand. The iron head was stained with blood. It was a tool for hunting monsters of the deep. That day it had been used on the monsters that came from the sea. Number 3, the coward's weapon that burned a city. Sigfrid and Sinrik were the chieftains. They led the great Viking fleet that sailed up the Seine in 885. Their goal was Paris, the heart of West Francia, but Paris was an island, protected by the river and by two massive fortified bridges. The Vikings could not simply assault the walls, they had to break the bridges. For months they tried. They attacked the bridge towers with siege engines. They filled the river with the bodies of their dead. The Franks, led by Count Odo, held strong. The siege dragged on. The Viking army was stalled. They needed a new weapon, a new approach. Asbjorn was a shipbuilder. He had been tasked with a special project. He was not building a sleek longship for raiding. He was building a weapon of terror. He took 3 old, worn-out cargo ships. He and his men worked on them day and night. They did not repair them. They filled them, they loaded the ships with everything that would burn, dry wood, straw, bundles of pitch-soaked reeds. They stacked them high. Then they brought on barrels of animal fat and oil. They poured it over everything, letting it soak into the wood. The ships became floating piles of tinder. The plan was simple. They would turn the ships into fire ships. They would set them ablaze and send them down the river to crash into the wooden bridge. The fire would hopefully be so intense that it would burn the bridge down, opening the way to Paris. It was seen by some warriors as a coward's tactic. A real warrior met his enemy face to face with an axe. This was a weapon you used from a distance. It was a weapon of destruction, not of combat, but Sigfrid was a practical leader. He wanted Paris. He did not care how he got it. The night of the attack was dark and rainy. The river was swollen and fast-moving. Asbjorn and a small crew of volunteers sailed the 3 fire ships to a point upstream of the bridge. This was the most dangerous part. The Franks on the bridge tower might see them. An arrow could hit one of them. They waited for the signal. A single horn blast from the Viking camp. When it came, they worked quickly. They lit torches and threw them into the holds of the 3 ships. The oil and pitch caught instantly. The flames roared to life with a whoosh that could be heard across the water. The heat was incredible. Asbjorn and his men had only a few moments to escape. They scrambled over the side and into a small boat they had been towing behind them. They rowed for their lives away from the inferno they had created. The 3 ships, now massive, uncontrolled bonfires, were caught by the current. They drifted down the river, lighting up the night. The Frankish defenders on the bridge watched in horror as this wall of fire bore down on them. They shot arrows at the ships, but it was useless. The first ship hit the bridge. The sound was a great crash of splintering wood, followed by the roar of the flames as they found new fuel. The other 2 ships piled in behind it. The bridge, which had withstood months of direct assault, was now being consumed by a fire of unimaginable heat. The timber smoked, then glowed, then burst into flame. Fire was one of the most feared weapons of the age. It was used to burn villages, destroy crops, and terrorize populations, but the use of fire ships was a sophisticated tactic of naval and siege warfare. It required planning, resources, and courage from the men who had to deliver the weapon. The Viking attack on the Parisian bridge ultimately failed. A section of the bridge was destroyed, but the Franks managed to repair it. The siege continued, but the fire ships had shown the ingenuity and ruthlessness of the Vikings. They were not just mindless raiders, they were clever tacticians who would use any weapon, any tool, to achieve their objective. Asbjorn, the shipbuilder, had not wielded a sword, but his creation had struck a more powerful blow against Paris than 1,000 warriors. Number 2, the barbed spear that crippled the English king. The year is 1066. The place is a hill near Hastings, in Sussex. Harold Godwinson, the last Anglo-Saxon king of England, stands with his army. They have formed a massive shield wall on the top of the hill. Below them is the invading army of William, Duke of Normandy. The Normans were themselves descended from Vikings, and their way of war still had much in common with their ancestors. The battle has raged all day. The Norman knights have charged the shield wall again and again, but they cannot break it. The English huscarls, the elite troops, stand firm, their long-handled axes taking a terrible toll on the horses and men. But the Normans have other weapons. They have a large contingent of archers, and they have spearmen who carry a particular type of throwing spear. It is called an angon. Let us look at one of these spearmen. His name is Robert. He is not a knight. He is a common soldier. His angon is a long, thin javelin. What makes it special is its head. It has a long iron shank like a javelin, but the head itself has two sharp barbs pointing backward. The purpose of the angon was not just to wound a man, it was to defeat a shield. Robert and his fellow spearmen are ordered forward. They advance to within 30 yards of the English shield wall. The huscarls jeer at them. They are safe behind their wall of linden wood and iron. The Norman officer gives the command. Robert and the others throw their angons. The light spears fly through the air, arcing high. They are not aimed at the men, they are aimed at the shields. Robert's angon strikes the shield of a large huscarl standing right next to King Harold. The spearhead punches through the wood. The barbs on the other side catch and lock it in place. Now the huscarl has a problem. The angon has a long, heavy iron shank and a wooden shaft. It is now stuck in his shield, and it is incredibly awkward. The weight of it pulls his shield down. He cannot easily lift his shield to defend himself. He tries to pull the angon out, but the barbs prevent it. He tries to break the shaft, but it is too strong. He is now forced to either fight with his shield arm weighed down and his defense compromised, or to discard his shield entirely, leaving himself completely exposed. This was the genius of the angon. A volley of these spears could effectively disarm a section of a shield wall by making the shields unusable. It was a tactical weapon designed to create an opening for the knights to exploit. The famous Bayeux Tapestry, which depicts the Battle of Hastings, shows the death of King Harold. The most common interpretation is that he was struck in the eye by an arrow. The tapestry shows a figure with an arrow in his head, but another figure next to him is shown clutching a spear that has been thrown into his chest. Some historians have argued that this, too, represents Harold's death, or a part of it. Whether it was an arrow or a spear, the principle was the same. The Normans used projectile weapons to break the deadlock of the shield wall. The angon, a weapon with deep roots in the Germanic and Frankish warfare that influenced the Vikings, was a key part of this. It was a specialized tool for a specific job. The English shield wall at Hastings eventually broke. King Harold was killed. The Anglo-Saxon era was over. The victory was won by the Norman knights, but it was made possible by men like Robert, the common soldier. His weapon was not a glorious sword. It was a clever, barbed spear designed to tear apart the defense of his enemy. It was a small, crucial piece in a battle that changed the course of history. Number 1, the weapon we know, only by its song. We return to Hlíðarendi in Iceland around the year 990. We return to Gunnar Hámundarson making his last stand. His bowstring is broken. His enemies are closing in. He stands in the doorway of his farmhouse, his sword in one hand, his atgeir in the other. What was this weapon? The saga is our only real guide. The name itself, atgeir, is a puzzle. It might mean stabbing spear or piercing spear. It is sometimes translated as halberd, bill, or polearm. When Gunnar's son Hogni later uses the weapon to avenge his father, he thrusts it through a man's body and lifts him up, pinning him against a wall. This suggests a weapon with some kind of crossguard or wings to prevent it from going in too deep, much like a boar spear. Let's imagine it. It is not a simple spear. It has a long wooden shaft, perhaps of ash, for reach and strength. The head is complex. It is not just a leaf-shaped blade. There is a cutting edge, like an axe. There is a sharp point for thrusting. There might be a hook on the back for pulling men from their horses or hooking the edge of a shield. It is a combination weapon. It is the medieval equivalent of a Swiss Army knife, but for killing. Gunnar faces his foes. A man named Onunder runs at him. Gunnar does not wait. He thrusts with the atgeir. The point takes Onunder in the middle and lifts him from his feet. Gunnar throws him, impaled on the weapon, into the river that runs past the farm. The saga says the weapon sang. What does this mean? It could be a poetic description, or it could be a clue. A well-made weapon with a large, thin steel head can make a humming or ringing sound when swung through the air at speed. It speaks to the quality of the weapon's construction. It was not a crude lump of iron. It was a finely balanced, expertly forged piece of steel. It was a weapon with a voice. Gunnar fights on. He is a whirlwind of motion. He uses the atgeir's reach to keep his enemies at bay. He uses its point to pierce their shields. He uses its edge to cut them down. For a time, one man holds off dozens. The atgeir is the perfect weapon for a single warrior fighting against many. It allows him to control the space around him. But no weapon can overcome impossible odds forever. They finally get to him. The saga says he received many wounds, but did not fall until he was dead. His atgeir, the singing weapon, was likely broken or taken by his killers. No confirmed atgeir has ever been found by archaeologists. We have found thousands of spearheads, hundreds of axe heads, and many swords. But not this. It remains a ghost in the Viking arsenal. It exists only in the words of the sagas. A semi-mythical weapon wielded by one of Iceland's greatest heroes. It represents the things we have lost, the things we don't know. Our picture of the Viking Age is built from the objects they left behind. But some things do not survive. Some weapons were rare, custom-made for a specific warrior. The atgeir may have been one of these. A specialized polearm, perhaps of a unique design known only to a few smiths, so we are left with the story. The story of Gunnar, a man who could leap his own height in full armor, and the story of his weapon, the atgeir. A weapon so deadly and so distinctive that it sang its own song of death. You know, it is the most forgotten weapon of all because we have nothing left of it but the echo of that song carried down to us through 1,000 years of storytelling.